A fair warning, today's watch isn't one you can just easily go out and buy. And I know some of you just hate that. But today we're going to take a look at the Gray Islander Melville GMT, or ISL-212. One of the coolest original watches I've seen Mark come out with his Islander watches. Which is why as soon as I saw this one, as soon as it came out earlier this year, I bought it. And eventually they did sell out. And so far they haven't come back into stock. But if you like what you see, go bug Mark, not me. Because the more people that tell him that they want one of these, the more likely he is to set up another batch. That said, let's get to it here. And if for some reason you've never heard of Mark or Islander watches, it is the affordable watch brand of Long Island Watch, and Mark's the owner. And over the years I've done this channel, I think it's been pretty cool to see Mark go from one of the community's most well-respected, trusted, authorized dealers to now one of the more trusted brand owners. And while Islander originally started out with Seiko homages, they have aggressively been expanding out with more designs. And I mean aggressive. If there's one complaint I'd have against Islander watches, it's that he's coming out with way too many and it's way too hard to keep track. It seems like every week or two there's a new release. And in some ways, it's a good problem to have for him. But this is one of their newest, and I think it came out back in late March. And as a GMT junkie, I love this design at first sight. In the past, I've seen one of the more common complaints against Islander seems to be that they start their designs backwards. That when they start making a watch, they start by crossing specs and features off a checklist, only to come up with the actual design afterwards. And as such, the designs are often not as original or as cohesive as some might like. But that was in the past, and I think as a whole, with every new design, they're really coming into their own. So when I look at this one, there are a few aspects here that remind me of some other watches. But as a whole, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Combining a clean-cut case, a hammer punch textured dial, inner GMT track, and a pretty interesting loom layout, where instead of filling in all the various elements, it's used more to outline them, giving this really killer loom look. And as a whole, this thing comes across as a very clean, subtle, yet exotic tool watch. And that's really the best thing about it, that this design comes to life as it moves around. From the brushed surfaces of the indices to the subtle contours of the hammer strikes on the dial, it all catches the light in different ways, all of which is further magnified, literally, by the curvature of the sapphire crystal, creating a very eye-catching and engaging experience on a watch that in some ways is also a bit of a contradiction. Up close, there's a lot going on here, even though it is nicely organized. And for me, that's where things get interesting. But at a distance, on your wrist, it gives off a more clean, symmetrical feel. A lot of which is thanks to the case. There's nothing really overly elaborate here. Just a brush clean bezel, brushed top, with polished sides and a very narrow chamfer on the inside of the lugs, giving this a very clean, streamlined look. And I think I was particularly drawn to this gray one because at the time I was actually researching some watches from Grand Seiko. And one of the ones I was really interested in was the SBGA 427 with these really vibrant green hands and grayish silver dial. And seeing that with the GMT hand and the really textured dial, that's really what got me hooked on this one. And as a side note, I didn't wind up getting that Grand Seiko, but I did get one of its cousins. Or siblings. This is the Seiko Frost version. I think that one was the Autumn. Back to the Melville. Now, having a smaller GMT hand and an inner GMT ring, that can be both good and bad depending on the design, from watches I've seen before. On a dive-style watch, having an inner GMT ring keeps the hand away from the GMT bezel, creating not only distance, but in some ways a sense of disconnect between the two, all with the regular timekeeping bits sort of stuck in the middle. And sometimes it looks cool, sometimes it works, and other times it doesn't. However, on a watch like this, where it's more of a casual piece with a clean bezel, that's not a problem. And it winds up feeling more integrated into the whole design. And in case you didn't catch it earlier, this one is using a Seiko NH34 collar's GMT movement, meaning that GMT hand can move around independently, helping it keep track of a second time zone. The Melville is also an excellent watch when it comes to proportions. A lot of people these days are pushing for smaller, slimmer watches, but for me, and I think a lot of others, 40 is still in that sweet spot. And here, when it's 40 with a 47mm lug-to-lug, I think it should still fit a wide variety of people, while giving some tremendous wrist presence. And with the gray leather strap that Islander included, it's very comfortable throughout the day. Now that strap is nothing exceptional, but it's still good and comfortable. And if you really want a bracelet, it wasn't available when I ordered this one, but I think there is now an option. And as long as we're on the website, check out this price. That is really the icing on the cake. $269, which in a world saturated with inflation, this is pretty remarkable to see. For a solid, well-made GMT with sapphire, it's hard to go wrong here. These days, AliExpress has kind of taken over the affordable watch world. But outside of that, Mark and Islander have really become the next go-to. Seiko seems to have lost its footing here, and in recent years, Mark seems to have taken over where they left off, and offering some great affordable, good quality watches. Now, that's where things are good, but as usual, nothing's really perfect. And I do have 3 little complaints or nitpicks here. The first of which is lume. And in a lot of ways, this really shouldn't be surprising considering the unusual application here, where it's an outline instead of filling everything in, because an outline doesn't offer a lot of surface area. And at first, this does look fantastic. It's killer with this whole Tron-esque vibe. But unfortunately, it doesn't last long, which is a bit of a disappointment, lasting maybe about as long as my Vostok Amphibia. Although, at the same time, part of what makes this thing really cool is just how they did it. So while I am a lume junkie, I'm not sure I'd have them change this up just to get better lume performance. The second thing, and this might also be pretty obvious, is that it's not the most legible watch. At least with this gray version, as brushed metal on gray with thin white streaks doesn't really offer you a ton of contrast. The other 2 versions, like the black and the blue, they're probably much better at this. But with this one, the gray one, other than that GMT, the hands don't immediately pop out at you. Now, you can still make them out, just takes a little bit more time. Here, the brush surfaces of the hands do react differently to light than the hammered craters on the dial. But comparatively, it's still a little bit problematic. And lastly, we got to zoom in for this one. But here, the counterweight of the second hand seems a little bit odd, at least at first. Because at wrist length, you notice something's there, but you're not really sure what. Then you look a little bit closer, and you notice it looks like a little bit of a T, which is very similar to Tissot's counterweights, making this a little more confusing. But then when you finally go into macro, you notice it looks a little bit more like Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, especially with those little grooves on the handle. And considering the dial with the hammer strikes, it does make sense and it's kind of a fun Easter egg. But, backing back out from a more broader perspective, it does look a little bit odd with the very angled hands, and I'm not sure it works. Bottom line, it's a very cool original GMT sold at a great price, which is really what affordable watches are all about, giving you everything you need in a good watch. And I love the depth and how the dial reacts as it catches the light, creating this very clean yet engaging design. At this point, I really don't need another GMT, but the exotic nature of this one just caught me and I had to buy it. And if you look at it for too long, you may be hooked too. But as usual, let me know your thoughts on it down below, and what are your thoughts on Islander watches? Is there one that's your favorite? And as always, you guys know what to do down below. It's pretty standard these days. But I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.